West Rupert, August 1928, August 17th, and born at home. And that's where I grew up until I was married, and lived on this dairy farm with my father and uncle owned together. Father had seven offspring and had four sons and three daughters. And my uncle had four sons and one daughter, and we all worked together on this farm. And I was, well, Don was the oldest, Elsie is next, Francis next, Anna next, then I come along, and then two brothers, Bob and Evan, younger. And we grew up in that one house, one bathroom, and it wasn't that convenient. But
Is the house still there?
oh yes,
Which house is it?
you know where the farm is.
Right, yeah.
The silos are worth it. The house on the other side of the road, just before you get down the hill.
Okay.
We had registered air shears, red and white animals, and we had, I don't know, approximately 175, 80 head altogether, and we shipped milk to H.P. Hood's, which their plant was in Salem, but all the milk went from there to Boston. And we, during World War II, we were the largest producer of milk that went into the Boston market. It was a competition between our farm and the farm in Fort Anne.
Wow.
And but we were, and also during the war, the farmers were deferred to if they had a large farm, and a lot of the other farms around are small farms, and their sons were drafted. They went into the service. And my brother Don was the oldest, and he was. They drafted him, but they sent him home. They said, "You needed more on the farm than you are in the army."
People had to eat, right?
And he was kind of upset, and a lot of the other farmers were kind of jealous. You know, he got to stay home, but he was. But during the war, we produced enough milk to defer 12 men, but there were just two that were deferred: my brother Don and cousin Bill. So it was a big operation at the time. It's not very big compared to today's farms, but
at the time
it was big. And we had well, we raised the usual crops, hay and corn, and made corn silage, and that was before they was making grass silage. It was all baled hay, and we had we used to put in the loose hay with a hay loader towed behind a truck and a wagon with the horses, and that would pick the hay up and put it onto the wagon. You had to do it by hand, stack it on to make a good load, and then you go into the barn, and they called it hay fork. It was run out from ropes and pulleys and come down from the roof of the barn, and a pointed thing goes down in and lock it, and you take a huge big bundle of hay up, and it goes up to the track, and then it moves it down the track to where you want to trip it, and down it go. And then two men would be in the mow picking it up and stacking it back, and that was a dirty process. Then we got a hay baler. We couldn't. The government wasn't allowing much farm equipment to be made during the war, so all of a sudden one became available that they allowed us to get a big New Holland baler. And it produced these big square bales, and they would weigh 75, 80 pounds apiece. And we picked them all up. We used two teams of horses and two wagons. And when we were boys, I remember I had one wagon, and my cousin Tom had the other wagon, and well, my brother Evan usually was the youngest, and he would be on there driving the team while we were going, and we never stopped. I made a long hook with a handle on it, with a crook on the end. The bales would be laying on the ground, and horses kept walking along, and just drive that hook in and pull it up, swing it on around, and the other guy would stack it on the wagon. And we hauled about 35 bales to a load. We'd go it to the barn and dump it onto the hay conveyor and unload it, and the other wagon was out in the field picking up. We did this all day long, and sometimes through 1,000 bales a day, and without stopping. And we'd stop to eat at noontime, and then we go back out again, and somebody usually gets started milking the cows by 4 o'clock, and sometimes we'd be working until almost dark getting the hay in, but we just
How many cuttings did you
well,
do then?
you know, some of the alfalfa we'd get three cuttings, and that would be the better quality, but it was just while we were doing this, we were competing with each other, each wagon load, and see who could get the most in. But it was all in fun. And well, we had, and my cousin would run to the baler. He'd be off baling neighbors' hay, and we'd get ours finished up, and then we'd always be done before the 4th of July. And that was the day we all got together and had a big picnic. And I remember once we had a little bit of hay left that morning, and we had to go get that cleaned up because we were going to have good hullabaloo that afternoon. And I was unloading the hay with a hay fork, and it would rope come down through a pulley on this fork, and this rope went up to the top and out to the other outside the barn, hooked to a horse, and that was what they'd pull the hay up. And I needed more rope, so I was yelled to more rope so I could get the hay fork into the hay on the wagon. And he thought I said to go, and then I had my hand on the rope, and it pulled up that pulley right up against my hand and pulled me right up to the top. And my brother Don was in the mow, and he saw me coming up there, and he yelled, and he stopped, and the rope was pulling me against the pulley, so I couldn't get it out. And that rope was burning all the time. And as soon as that horse stopped, it backed just a little bit and let my hand loose. And I dropped down onto the load, and they took all the skin right off, all those fingers right down to everything. And I just looked at it and didn't feel a thing. All of a sudden, it started to burn. Boom. And I ran out, stuck it into the cold water. Then I ran to the house and back there, and they used to put butter on everything to burn and so forth. And then my father came along. He took me to this lady there in West Europe, Mrs. Lincoln. She was a town health officer. She was a registered nurse. And father took me in there, and she took care of that. And I never got any infection, but she changed that bandage every day. The skin started to grow, and I had it bandaged all the time. And
How old were you?
oh, I don't know, maybe 12, 14. And well, I think when it got done, what do I owe you? You know, Father asked Mrs. Lincoln, and she says, well, whatever. You know, his father gave her two dressed hens. And that's the way we were paid back then. And but I never had any problem with it. And well, in a way, we just continued that afternoon after Dad that afternoon. We had our usual 4th of July picnic, no problems. I could still eat. That was our first cutting of hay. Then later the second crop was ready, and you had to do that. And we always planted a lot of oats. When you seeded your ground, you planted your grass seed and used oats as a cover crop. And we used to thrash the oats. And I remember there was a cooperative thing. My father and uncle owned part of the threshing machine, and Uncle Everett Farr, he owned part of it, and somebody else owned part of it, and we took turns to do each other's farms, threshing the oats. And they all bring their teams, and
It was horse-drawn.
and draw the oats in and throw them in. I remember we used to have to bag the oats. They'd come out of the bottom in a basket, and then you have to put them in a burlap bag, and then hot and sticky all day long. But that was part of it. And then by that time it'd be the third crop would be ready. And then by that time, it was time to start getting your corn cut and put that into the silos. But we used to use even cooperative help, different farms. We all get together and all help put corn in one guy's silo, and then to go to the next farm. And it wasn't any forage harvesters. You had corn harvested, they called it. They'd cut it and had it in bundles and wrapped a string around it and dropped it down. Then you pick it up and put it on your wagon with your team of horses, and then you drive it up to the silo, and there was called an instant cutter, and you throw it onto that conveyor, and it went in, and there's several knives in there and a blower, and it blew it up the pipe into the silo.
What powered that?
Tractor.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah,
Had a tractor.
always had a tractor. Yeah, I grew up on an old, they call it McCormick 1020, with old iron wheels. Then I remember when they first got, I think Sears and Roebuck come out with, you could buy these rims and tires to put on. So we got rid of the old iron wheels and had the rubber tires. Oh, that was just like riding a Cadillac. Yeah, that was my first experience with a tractor, was the old McCormick. Not very fast on the road, but didn't need to worry about that. Oh, I just didn't realize what the Rupert village was. I never came here except go to Sunday school and church, and I always say, who wants to live in that town or that village? And then when I got into high school, had several here in Rupert Village was in the same class, and we all got together, and then we started playing baseball, and we'd have rivalry between the Rupert and West Rupert baseball, and we had some pretty good players, and I don't know.
Where was the field, or where did you play?
Any place that was a vacant lot that wasn't covered with hay or corn. Yeah, no, we didn't have anything special. No, and it was well, yeah. Sometimes it was this field out back of this house that we played, and sometimes it was, and even at the pasture, it was vacant. You know, we'd play in it, but we played every minute we had free that we had, or else when we had other free time, we'd go fishing in the summer, and we did a lot of that too.
Where was your favorite fishing spot then?
Oh, White Creek, yeah, and what we call the Millbrook that comes up next to the railroad track. Yeah, they were all good fishing spots. Oh, yeah. Oh, well, I went to grade school. Where the town office is now. We call it the little side and the big side. The little side was the first 4 grades. The big side was the 5th through 8th. And
So 2 rooms?
2 rooms, yeah. And teacher had 4 grades, and she did everything, and we all survived. And unfortunately, I spent 5 years in the little side. It was when I was in the 4th grade. My cousin Tom was sitting right beside of me, and we used to compete. And we didn't, we were kind of stupid to do this, but when, like in math, instead of totaling up the numbers, we just write numbers in, just so you could get done the quickest. And at the end of the year, you got your report card. Yeah, repeat the next year the same grade. And well, one mother got the report card. It was something to pay. We learned our lesson. Yeah. Then I finished grade school and went to Salem 4 years, and it was quite an experience to go from a little small schoolroom to so many students, but it was a good time. I played sports, and I didn't play football. I played everything else, and but there was no late bus for transport and get home when you get done practice. You had to make your way home as best you could. I know when we first started baseball, my cousin Tom and I walked every night for a week from Salem home, and we used
What
to
is that? 5?
7 miles,
7 miles.
and that was the road was terrible. There was so many potholes in it, and nobody wanted to drive it. But anyway, there was no traffic back then. Nobody working. There was one person in town who worked in Salem, and usually we couldn't catch him, and so we'd walk up this road. The railroad track was next to the road. We'd stay in the road, but then they got all those turns, and we'd follow the track all the way up through. And we told the coach we wanted to play baseball. We didn't want to walk home every night. So he let us out a few minutes early, and sometimes there was a carpenter that worked there, and there was a guy worked in the mill, and we'd get a ride, and that worked out pretty good. Then the basketball, a lady here in town carried mail. I think she made 3 trips a day to Salem, to West Rupert and Rupert. And the last one was late, so you get done practice basketball, to shower and get a walk down to the corner where Tomasi's shop was, stand there and wait for the post office across the street. And as soon as I see her load up, I'd walk out and she'd stop, pick me up, and ride up through and get up to West Rupert. I'd help drag the mail into the post office, and I'd walk back up the road to home. It was half a mile.
You have to do chores when you got home too?
No, it was all done by that time. It was 7:30 or so when I got home.
Okay.
Because we were always done with chores by 5:36.
Okay.
Yeah, my father and uncle always insisted, going to be done, get home and have supper. Yeah,
Then
yeah,
gets rest and then
yeah,
start early the
and
next
do
day.
it all over again.
Yeah.
It was a great experience. So yeah, when I was in high school, there's the ag teacher was after me and says, "Well, aren't you going to take ag?" I said, "I'm not going to be a farmer. I'm not interested in it at all." So I never took any ag, wasn't in the FFA.
You knew that then.
Yeah, that was it. I'm not going to be a farmer. Then I after high school, had 1 year of college, and then I got away. I missed the farm. And the second year, I was in college down south, and then I was going to go to University of Vermont, and I was accepted. And back then, right after war, they only take one person from town, each town. And there was a guy, one of the leeches over in East Rupert, came to see me, and he said he'd applied, and he said, "You had first dibs on it." And he said, "Are you going to go? If you're not, I'm going to go." I said, "Go ahead." My father wasn't feeling that great, and he kind of liked to have me stay there. So I said, "All right, I'll stay on the farm." So that's what I ended up doing.
So when did you graduate?
High school,
High school.
1946.
46.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the war was over. A lot of my classmates, a lot of the guys, or maybe a little bit older, they dropped out of school and enlisted in the service, and I felt, hey, I should go, but I was only 16, and nothing to take me then. And my uncle had 4 sons, and my brother Don had his own farm. So there was my 2 brothers and I, and my father, and we'd been renting this farm here in Rupert Village for 6 years, and did all the crops and so forth, and kept the young stock and dry cows in the barn here in the wintertime. And we decided we'd buy the place, and the only way we could buy it was let the lady that owned it live there as long as she lived. Her name was Martha Roberts, and she's a real nice lady, and so that's the only way that we could get it. And so we bought it in May 1950, and she lived 2 years, and that was May, and then in September, my wife and I were married, and we of course couldn't have the house, but we used to call it the cottage, which turned out to be the cobbler shop. It was behind another house next door, so we could rent that. And so we were, I don't remember how much we paid for rent, but it wasn't very much. And we lived there for 2 years, and Mrs. Roberts died, and they had an auction and sold the stuff off, and we carried our furniture across the lawn into the house and lived there until 1965. Just a simple, small little house and one large room and a couple of small rooms downstairs and then a couple of rooms upstairs. No bathroom. And but the big house it was attached to, or it was pushed right up against the back of it, and I opened the door and you'd walk through this long hallway down to the other house, and Mrs. Spencer Harwood, just Jessie Harwood, owned the place, and we rented it for her and said, I have a bathroom upstairs, the bathroom downstairs, you use the one downstairs. I could walk right down that hallway and a door right there into that bathroom. So it worked out real well, and but it was cold in that little cottage. I bought a parlor stove for it, and you could put your hand on top of it when it was going full blast and hard to keep your hands warm. And so the next year, the neighbor had an old pot-bellied metal stove, and I think I paid $3 for it, and I put it in, and that was warm enough. You sometimes have to open the doors up to get so hot in there. The thing would be turned bright red on the sides. And we moved to the big house and was there till 1965. And something happened. I hurt my back when I was growing up, and when I was skating, I did something to it, but it never bothered me much. But then doing farm work, something happened, and I got so I couldn't do anything. The last year I was there, I only worked. There was 5 months I didn't do anything, only just doctors, and finally decided it's time to do something else.
So were you in constant pain?
Oh yes, all the time. Yeah, and my brother. Worst trouble was back then the government came out with this new bill that every male had to serve in the service, no matter what. And my brother Evan was eligible. So then they said, you're going to go. And told me that we needed help here and just no way. Got to go. That's it. Law says he has to serve. So, and he immediately went to Rutland, talked to the recruiters, and when he was going into the Marines, and the Marine officer there says, when you get your notice to report to the Army, you give me a call. And so that's what happened. And I took him to Rutland, and he grabbed the bus, and off he went to Paris Island, and he was in the Marines for a couple of years, and he was 24, 25, and all the other recruits are older than 17, 18-year-olds. But he was nothing going on in the world anywhere as far as any activity. Anyway, he was talking to one of his officers, says, what are you doing here? Said he knew he was from the farm. He said you should be home working, and he gave him some papers, filled out, sent them home, have them filled out, and we'll get you out of here and go home, be useful. But did all this, and then one officer signed it and passed it up the line, and pretty soon he get to another one. He said, "Rip it up." Nope, you're here. You're going to stay here. And in a way, did that a couple of times. Then one day, my father was a good friend of Senator George Aiken, and he was went to see him somewhere one time. He says, "Well, John, how's the farm going?" And he says, "The farm's going, but we need some help." And he said, "My son's in the Marines, and I'd like to have him home." And he says, "What? He doesn't need to be in the Marines. He should be home working. There's nothing activity in the world." Says, "I'm going back to Washington a couple of days, and I'll send you up some papers and fill them out and send them back." And so it wasn't too long. My father and I were doing something at the barn, and my mother came running over, and she said, "You wanted on the phone?" He said it was important. I don't know who it was. So he took off and ran across the road and to get the phone. He came back in a few minutes with a big smile. Says, "That was George Aiken. just called and said, John, your boy will be home tomorrow. So drove over to Glens Falls, picked him up, and that was it. And he said there was nothing he needed being in the service. One thing if it was a war or something going on, but you're more useful at home, though. That's the way it worked out. In 1948 or 49, we had a terrible storm come through in the summer. The power company had just put new lines from the house where we lived there in East Street towards Kent Hollow. And they were up higher, and there was a huge elm tree right in the front yard. And it rained so much, the leaves got so soaked up or whatever, they were drooping down and right on the wires. They just put up that afternoon and started a fire. And it was burning pretty good. And that pouring rain, you never saw it rain so hard. The little brook that ran the back of the barn, come down the Lang Road, it was over flooding, and we got done the chores, we got to the house, the power was off, and my father tried to call, right here in this house is where the central telephone station was. And right here, right out there in that room was all the switchboard. And you'd call, you'd just ring your thing, and they'd say, number please, and they tried to call, you couldn't get a call through it here, you're going to report the power, the fire and the lines. And so he said to me, why don't you drive up to Sheldon's, that's the one that lived here, and tell them maybe they can get through. And so I started out with a car, and I got to the Hebron Road. The brook was going to just piling up against the railroad bridge, and I said, boy, there's a lot of rain coming down through here. I got up, come around the corner right by where the firehouse is. I saw something up the road. I said, what's going on? And then I kept moving along, and then I saw people up there waving their arms, and then I said, what's coming down the road? There was this wall of water coming right down towards me. And before I stopped, there was a bucket or something got under the car, and a rattly bang, and I backed down and turned around by the firehouse, and I headed back down. I got down to the railroad, the Hebron Road, and the water was going, instead of going under the bridge, it was going down across the field towards Siglowski's. So I stopped in the Siglowski's and said, do you have any calves, anything out in your barn? He said, yeah, why? I said, there's a wall of water coming down through. And it was, it go down, I helped Walt get out 2 or 3 small calves out of the barn. And by that time, the water had gone over across the road, and he had some hens, and where Siglowski had a garage there, and the hens were in there, and they were all floating out across. And then I took off down to my brother Don's. He just got a new hay baler, and it was sitting out there by the barn, and I ran to the house, and he and his wife were sitting there eating supper, and I said, Don, hurry up, get your tractor, get your hay baler, it's going to be covered in water. Well, he kept on eating, and his wife got up and looked out the window, and she screamed, Donald, Donald. And he got up then and got the tractor. By that time, it was up over the hitch on the baler, but we got it out of there okay. And that just took Lewis, it's the Authentic Design now, the lighting place, used to be Lewis's Mill. They did a lot of white birch, and they had just cords and cords of birch slabs out back by the railroad. And it just took all of those around the brook, and it just washed all the way down through. I remember going down later, just before dark, in Salem, get down to where the bridge is down by Matthew's garage, and you could see the slabs going down the brook, going down through there, and it washed out the roads up here. It was
Were the roads paved even?
No.
No.
It was paved as far as just about where Doug Armstrong lives.
Okay.
That was the end of the paving, and there was holes 4 feet deep in the road there, and the fishers, they destroyed a barn and something else. There was so much water coming down through. It was a mess.
Town road crew, right?
Yeah, there was a road commissioner. Yeah,
there was.
Yeah, yeah.
So
One person. Yeah.
Okay.
And I remember seeing, talk about road commissioner. I have an old town report back in 1938 or 39. My father was road commissioner, and it listed all of the employees or all the workers, all their paychecks and all what they got. And the average worker, he was getting paid 35 cents an hour. And my father was the boss, so he got 39 cents an hour.
But that was in addition to his farming job,
Oh yeah,
of course.
yeah. Well, they had a dump truck, and that was their town used that or rented it. And another one, Melford Bibbins, had a truck, and they didn't have any town trucks, so they had to hire out all the labor. Okay, well, I was interested in carving. I saw on TV some guy that was carving, and I said, that looks interesting, and I said, I'll try it. So I just used a jackknife and some files and started whittling away at it, and sometimes I'd have a little small coping saw. And then a neighbor gave me some carving tools, just some simple ones. And I started using that, and then I tried to get the details, and I just got a book, Audubon's book, showed in detail the colors and how they were, the lengths and so forth. So I copied those, and I had a few failures, threw away, but I just kept working at it, and it got to be relaxing and had a lot of fun. And then I said, you ought to sell some. I said, oh, heck, I'm not doing that for making any money. I'm just doing it for fun. And, I gave one to the Methodist Church over here in Rupert once they were having some kind of a sale. And Aggie Bramer asked me if I wanted to donate something. I said, yep. So I boxed up a cardinal. I think it was one of the best ones I've done. Wrapped it up, sent it over, and then they saw a silent auction they had. Now, I don't know how much they got for it, but I never made another one. And I'm tempted to, but maybe someday I'll get the desire and start carving again. The fire here in town, the Guile house burned. That was in 1949, and that was the winter time. We had the barn full of animals, heifers, and my father called me about midnight, and he said, the Guile house is burning. You better get up there. It starts spreading to those other barns. You can get those animals out of the barn. So I drove up, and it was temperature down below zero, and Rupert didn't have any fire company, and Salem was here, West Paulet, Granville, and they had a couple of old army trucks with pumps on the front, and it was so cold that the pumps froze up. They couldn't get water going, and Granville had a big truck, and they finally got that to pumping water, but it was just destroyed the house. The Guile company was in business, but that was the house that Dr. Guile built back in the mid 1800s, whenever it was. Yeah, beautiful big house. We moved to New Hampshire in 1965, September, and I had to quit farming, so I went over there and bought an old country store, general store, and it had a post office inside, it had Gulf gas pumps outside, and it was a real country store, and right in a rural community, and it was something familiar to Rupert, and there's several old colonial houses, and people worked different jobs. A lot of people did maintenance on some of the rich people along on Lake Winnipesaukee, but they were all great people, great friends, and I thought we had a great time working there. We got used to it, and Natalie took care of the post office, and I was taking care of the store, and the older couple that we bought it from retired, and the business dropped down because they couldn't handle it, and the whole area was growing, and a few developments along the lake fronts were started. So we started getting more customers all the time, and business really grew for the first few years. And finally, we had, well, after school was out, on the bus stop, Diane would come in and change her clothes, go out and help me in the store, and Cindy worked in the house. So we got along great. And
You had two younger children then.
yes, both girls. Finally, they said, well, maybe we ought to sell and do something different. And so we started looking around, and people come to look at the store, but the interest rates at that time was terrible. Nobody,
70s and mid 70s.
yeah, and they could not get money to buy, and so that's why we went for a couple of years, and we finally took the store off the market, and until things revived a little bit, and we also were looking at another home over in Effingham, New Hampshire, at the same time, and that went the same way. And so he waited for us, and we waited for the other customers to buy the store, and eventually it happened. It was a great deal. Everyone missed us. They say they missed us on the way to the store. Didn't you miss the business? I said, no, didn't miss the business, but I missed the people. And we made such good friends. And I'm still acquainted with some all these years later, and some of the old timers. I was once selling equipment.
Okay.
I worked for John Deere for a few years, and then I went to Massey Ferguson until I retired. Yeah.
And when did you actually come back from New Hampshire back to Rupert?
That's what I don't remember. It's 6 or 7 years ago.
No, more than that. 8 or 10.
Well, it was 12 years ago when your mother died. And it was 2 years at least after that. Anyway.
Okay.
I was looking for a house,
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
and then
So-
this came up as
Yeah. We're 50 years over there.
Right.
Almost 50 or 49 and a half years that we lived in New Hampshire.
50 years.
Yeah.
Came back.
Get back to
here.
Rupert.
Diane bought this house.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. My wife had died, and so Diane said, why don't you sell yours and move? And Cindy and the other daughter said, why don't you sell your house and move? And
then I just moved over here.
yeah.
He
What-
came with me.
were you what was it like coming back after all those years to your birthplace?
Yeah, it was a little strange at times, and trying to get used to it, and they'd say, well, my brother Don, of course, was older than I am, and he'd say, we'd drive down the road, you know so-and-so. And we'd go by a house, and I'd say, who's living there? He, well, you know who that is. I said, Don, I haven't been here in 50 years. Things have changed. So, but eventually I got used to it. There's a lot of people moved in since I moved away, so it was different, but it felt good, really, to get back. And I said, well, I'm going back to Rupert, and I'm going to go fishing when I get there, because some of the old fishing holes I used to go to, but I haven't been fishing yet.